Hello, it's Andrew Eborn here with another Lives on Lockdown. In my quest to find people around the world and what they're up to in these extraordinary times. Today, I'm going to take you all the way to Barbados. Coming up right after this break. Well, welcome back. It's Andrew Eborn here, live on Lives on Lockdown. And I promised you a treat, and a treat we have had. Because, whoa, we're going to Barbados, and it's all the way to see my good mate, Terry Bent. How are you, Terry?
I'm good, thank you, Andrew. How are you?
I am so good. Well, listen, Barbados in lockdown, what does that mean?
Well, as it happens, the restrictions are being released a little bit as of tomorrow. We've been pretty much under a curfew now for about 6 weeks. The current curfew runs from 8 o'clock in the evening till 5 in the morning. Until recently, until last weekend, that curfew was 6 in the evening till 6 in the morning, and only essential workers were allowed out outside of those hours. And within the curfew hours, only essential workers were allowed out if they'd got a pass. So if they got stopped, then they could prove that they were supposed to be out and about on the streets. But apart from that, you were supposed to remain indoors except to go shopping. We had 2 opportunities each week to go shopping, one morning, one afternoon. Mine was Monday morning, Friday afternoon. It was done on the basis of the first letter of your surname. Right. But apart from that, you were supposed to stay indoors. For the first month, I think, of the curfew, they banned the sale of alcohol, which I'm sure you would understand. I was heartbroken by that. Fortunately, like anything like this, we had a black market system. If you knew someone who'd got a bar, that was obviously the bars and restaurants are closed, but they were happy to sell the stock out of the back door because it was going to reach its sell-by date. So we had a little black market going on in the alcohol department. But things have started to get a little bit better now. There are a lot more people out and about. More businesses have started to open from this week. The beaches opened last weekend for a couple of hours each morning, which was 6 till 9. As of tomorrow, we get a second go at the beaches. It will be 6 to 9 in the morning. And then for those people who are working, to give them a chance in the evening, I think it's going to be 4:30 till 6 or 6:30. So you get a chance to go out then as well. You've been allowed out to exercise, but not in groups. Single people can go out for a run, things like that. You obviously have to wear a mask in any of the shops and social distancing. But so pretty much like the rest of the world, but here in the sun, people want to go out to the beach, really, Well,
of course. Now, but I didn't quite follow was that the curfew time, because you mentioned essential workers twice. So the curfew, I mean, essential workers can go out any time.
But because we had 2 sort of sets of curfews.
Right.
One which was the mandatory curfew, where only essential workers could go out.
And who's classified as
the second curfew
worker in Barbados? Who's an essential worker?
Well, being Barbados, their definition of an essential worker is probably different to a lot of the world. I mean, even I have my newspaper delivered by a guy who contracts to the local newspaper. He delivers newspapers for them. He was classed as an essential worker, so I got my newspaper delivered every morning. Obviously, it's people like the Electricity Board, the Water Authority, people who work in hospitals, frontline NHS people, not NHS, Barbados Health Service people. People that were keeping the supermarkets open because for a couple of weeks, the supermarkets were only doing home deliveries, or you could order in advance and go and collect. So obviously they had to have people in the supermarkets fulfilling orders. But then they came up with a system whereby you could go out shopping twice a week based upon your surname. As I said, with a morning and an afternoon option. again, as of tomorrow, those rules have been changed. So the 2 days that I could have gone before, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, now I can go any time on those days. Because obviously the first week they brought it in, it was an absolute pandemonium.
Oh, I imagine. But I'm still not entirely clear about the curfew system, because I get essential workers. They can go and do their business when they need to. But the timing, who is allowed out when the curfew's lifted, and those hours that you mentioned?
It's an interesting. Here's the
Because that's
interesting.
what I thought. Because here, it's logical to do essential workers any
the way
time.
they did it.
Right.
They said that outside of the set curfew, everyone was still on curfew, except you were allowed to go out on your shopping day, to go to the supermarket, to a pharmacy, or your bank.
Yeah.
You could go out on those days. And then they realized that people needed to do other pieces of business. And so it became, even though there was a 24-hour curfew, it was basically, as long as you weren't going out just for the sake of going out, you may or may not get stopped. Confusing, Terry. Here's the thing, Andrew. The things with laws in Barbados is they make them up as they go along.
I get it. So a 24-hour curfew, I get, and there's certain exceptions to that. You can go and do your essential shopping depending on the letter of the alphabet of your surname. A bit bizarre, but that's what they do. But you mentioned there are set hours. That's the bit I don't follow, because if you're locked at home at a certain time, and so from 5 in the morning till whatever time it is, there are no excuses for people to be out. Is that basically it? So when it's curfew,
that's
you cannot basically it. All. When you've got that little window, you're allowed out for the essentials and so on and so forth. Is that right?
Yes, but
okay,
nobody. Not everybody observed it. As obviously, you know, I read the UK papers every day, and I see that in Telford, I think it was last night, someone had a bit of a rave.
Right.
Almost the same here in Barbados. And in fact, my newspaper's outside because I haven't been out and collected it yet.
Right.
But apparently here in Barbados on Friday evening, even though they're not allowed to open, things like nightclubs, restaurants, bars can't open at the moment. A nightclub opened, and apparently 20 or 30 people got arrested when the police found out. And so in the newspaper over this morning, which I was just looking to see if I could find it here as we're speaking.
Yeah.
It was so the people that were involved in that now have been to court yesterday. They opened the courts yesterday morning specifically to deal with them, and they're getting fines the equivalent of 2,000 English pounds, 5,000 Barbados dollars, for going out to a party at a nightclub. And that's the thing. And the big problem here has been, I mean, I live in a cul-de-sac, and even during curfew, there have been people up and down the road that shouldn't have been. Kids, it is really difficult for people who've got young kids. And obviously the schools are closed here, and one of my neighbours has a number of children living in their house, and they've been out and about, up and down the road on the bikes all day, every day, curfew or no curfew. There is
exploring that sort of stuff. So I mean, I get it. Your window of opportunity, that's what you get, which is slightly different to the UK. The UK used to be really simple. The first message was stay at home. Very clear. Boris came out and said, stay at home. That's what you've got to do. And we had the social distancing, about 2 meters apart, but you were allowed out for essential shopping, for medication, or to take one form of exercise a day. Those were the original rules that people understood. What then happened last week is we had a new message. You're still doing your social distancing and the essential shopping, but now you have to stay alert. Now, yes. What on earth does that mean? You know, that's assuming that people in the first place We're alert. And a lot of people, they can
Exactly.
be at home, nice and relaxed and everything, but just stay alert. It's a bizarre message, isn't it?
Well, funnily enough, I watched Boris live last week on English TV, and when he came out with that, the interesting thing was that he came on after I watched, I think it was ITV News just before he came on, and on ITV News you've got the Scottish woman, what's her name, Nicola Sturgeon,
Yeah.
saying, well, he can say this is going to happen in England, but it's not going to happen in Scotland, it's not going to happen in Wales, and it's not going to happen in Northern Ireland. We're still saying stay indoors. So you've got mixed messages, and that has been part of the problem here. People have obviously want to get on with their lives, which is understandable, but obviously people also have to realise that they can put themselves in danger by getting on with their lives. And it's in a small island like this, which basically relies on tourism, this island financially needs tourists back on the island. That's not going to happen anytime soon. So the government is currently doing deals with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, to try and support the island. It is difficult because, you know, it's not people think of Barbados as being wealthy, but Barbados is wealthy in terms of its tourist numbers. Without its tourist numbers, it's not a wealthy island, you know, and wages here aren't particularly high anyway.
What's an
For
average
the
wage
local.
in Barbados?
Sorry?
What's an average wage in Barbados? Put it in perspective.
Well, it's hard to say what an average wage is. I mean, say a waiter
Yeah.
in a bar, not necessarily a high class restaurant, but in a normal bar, a waiter may get the equivalent of around £4 an hour,
Right. Okay.
which is pretty much about the minimum wage in the UK. But
Oh
the
no, yeah, the
difference
minimum wage
is
is much higher now. That's about 40% of the minimum wage. So,
right, but the big problem here is because it's an island and everything that comes into the island has a cost. To get it here, then import duty, the cost of getting it here, the cost of the item in the first place. Obviously, the reason I know you is I met you here. You know that Barbados is an expensive island. Everything is expensive. And of course, when you have a shortage of things, then prices go up as well. And the government here have done a great job of trying to stop people price gouging. And that's what they've had to do because, you know, the basic people here in Barbados. Well, let me give you an example. For obviously, you have the furlough scheme in the UK. In Barbados, workers are going on the NIS, the National Insurance Scheme. That they're being paid out of the National Insurance Scheme, which obviously doesn't have a lot of money. So they're getting that. But so say a self-employed person, someone like a taxi driver, because taxi drivers are getting no work. There's no tourists on the island. Someone who may operate a small cafe or a shop selling tourist things. They were allowed to claim for 2 months only. It was for 2 months only. It was for, I think, either April and May or May and June, 1,500 Barbados dollars, which
what?
is the equivalent of just over £1,000.
Right.
So they'll get 2,000. Say they'll get £2,500 for 2 months to live on.
Well, I thought it's
And
about 3 Barbados to the pound, isn't it?
it's about 2.4 at the moment.
Well, okay, obviously depending a bit of fluctuation.
Yeah.
2.4 at the moment.
So $3,000 is, you know, about 1,500 quid,
Yeah.
and that's got to last them. It's less than 1,500 quid, and that's for 8 weeks to live on. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's not easy here. You know, when people think of Barbados as being a place for the rich and famous, yeah, it is. But the people who actually live here have to pay the same prices for things in the supermarket
And it is
as the
free.
rich and famous. You know, it's difficult.
Yeah, and people assume it's very reasonable, but actually, as you say, the majority. I was looking at cars and various, helping various people out, and most of it goes in tax, doesn't it? You can buy a car, but the majority, at least half that price, is in local taxes.
Yeah, well, if you buy a brand new car here, you'll pay about not far off 3 times what the equivalent car would cost in the UK,
Right.
which is, you know,
I was
obviously
telling you
why
earlier about
locals.
the national minimum wage. National minimum wage here, depending on how old you are, but for people over 24 and so on and so forth, is £8.72. And the national minimum wage in Barbados is £4, roughly that amount, yeah?
Yeah.
So it's about less than half what we get here. But the prices, well, there are some things which are surprisingly cheap and some things
Yes,
which are horrendously
rum,
expensive.
rum, because we make rum here.
Yeah.
But that's the problem. Sugar, sugar comes from here, and obviously rum derives from sugar. So sugar and rum, cheap,
Yeah.
so much cheaper than the UK. But if you want a bottle of wine, which is imported,
Yeah.
expensive,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
because
that's
it not
certainly
only.
what I noticed when I was there. And even taxis. I mean, taxis are probably more expensive than London, for example, for going around. But there's some great elements and some great tips when you do that. But as you say, that Barbados, and I guess the rest of the islands, are there the same rules for all the islands?
Well, well, each island obviously makes their own decisions. Most of the islands have realised that the Barbados Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, has pretty much got it right. She's done an absolutely tremendous job. You know, I couldn't praise Mia Mottley more. And in fact, I did say to somebody only the other day, if I had someone in charge of a country that I think would do a good job, obviously the woman in New Zealand's done a great job, and Mia Mottley in Barbados. And you know, you may say it's only a small country, but she's done such a good job. Um, you know, the other islands they had a CARICOM, which is the Caribbean's version of the European Union. They had a CARICOM heads of state meeting last week or the week before, and she's actually currently the head of the CARICOM heads of state. And she chaired the meeting, which I think was done on Zoom. And most of the other prime ministers have praised how well she's handled the whole situation. And she really has done a fantastic job. And she's, you know, she's made it bearable for the people of Barbados. You know, there's always going to be people complain because there's a lot of people not working. There's a lot of people wanting to work but can't work in places like bars and restaurants, which is understandable. But the big problem is, of course, it's not always easy to social distance. So, you know, some of the smaller bars, or as they're known over here, rum shops, it's very hard for them because they're small buildings, and if you're going to do it in the way Jamaica have done it, Jamaica announced earlier this week, just gone, I think they were allowing 4 or 5 people at the most into a rum shop at a time, and they were all supposed to social distance. Well, you know, you literally have someone in each corner and one person stood in the middle having a conversation, and you just can't see it working. You know, I mean, how can someone make
And
any
that's
money?
absolutely right. I mean, it is extraordinary. And this is what I find amazing, Terry, is when you compare how the different places around the world are handling this horrendous situation. Some are saying, okay, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to lock you down. Just a bit of advice: wash your hands, which is the common thing, and obviously a bit of social distancing. And you see the difference between places like Sweden and Australia and New Zealand, what's happening in Japan, what's happening in China, what's happening with you, and so on and so forth. And you mentioned one of the things you say: look, people are allowed into shops going forward, but obviously is the word you use, they have to wear a mask. Well, we've had a
Yeah.
big debate about that here, and actually they're saying actually you don't obviously have to wear a mask, so there's no rule to say that you do that here.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, obviously, it's not just wearing a mask. They are limiting the number of people allowed into a supermarket at a time, depending on the size of the supermarket. At one point, it was they were only allowing 25 people in at a time, and then they suddenly realised that some of the supermarkets are so big they can allow more in. So then they did it based upon the size of the supermarket. Small village shops were only allowed 6 people in. Supermarkets are allowed 25. Now I think the supermarkets are working. The big supermarkets are working on 70 to 100 people are allowed in at a time.
Yeah.
And there is somebody on the door counting
I've
people
been
in.
to some of the ones in Barbados, which are huge. They can do that as
Yeah,
long as the social distancing can be applied. We have the same thing. People stand on their little circle, 2 meters
yeah.
apart before you're allowed into the shop. But you've got the 2 meter rule, because I was talking to somebody in the Netherlands where it's only 1.5 meters extraordinarily. But it's 2 meter rule in Barbados, is it?
Yeah, 2 meters, 6 foot. That's what we're talking about. Because Barbados is one of those funny places where, being a former English colony, although having been independent since 1966, we have a mix of feet and inches and kilometers and meters.
Right.
It's strange that,
Kilometers and miles,
you
yeah.
talk to
Oh, it's a strange, strange thing.
people talking feet and inches and things like that.
Yeah.
Although youngsters now, a bit like the UK, the youngsters now are coming more over to the metric system.
Yes.
But people here still talk about feet and inches. But
Yeah.
then you get in the car and you drive down the road and the signs are in kilometers per hour.
Right.
And then you might see a sign that will say roadworks 200 feet.
Yeah. And it is very confusing, and that's why, I mean, for a lot of people, they are now marking out on the pavement what 2 meters mean. And basically 2 meters is me lying down and just thereabouts. So you can understand that if I lie down, which I do occasionally, that's 2 meters. But what's interesting, you mentioned about the furlough scheme that we have in the UK. What do they have in Barbados?
Well, as I say, the national insurance, people who have paid national insurance, because, I mean, most countries around the world, we all know there's a black economy where people work and probably don't contribute. And obviously, a lot of the tourist-based industries here, I've got to be very careful what I say here. The chances are that people who are offering jet ski rides on the beach, people who are trying to get people to do various touristy things, probably don't pay into the national insurance scheme, so they're not eligible to claim anything. A lot of the big companies. I mean, obviously here we have a lot of expats here working for construction companies, and the construction companies are pretty much, as far as I'm aware, still paying them their salaries. Because they need
Full salary, even if they can't build.
Yeah, because actually, construction was one of the first things that has been started again. And in fact, some of the construction schemes were exempt. They were the exempt categories as well of essential workers, because one of the big things they were doing is that the government here, as soon as this happened, started converting places into isolation centres. Because obviously we only have the one hospital here, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Bridgetown, which in itself anyway was due to undergo some reconstruction and revamping. So they converted what used to be an old American Air Force, I think. I don't think it was Army. I think it was an American Air Force base in the north of the island. They turned that into an isolation centre and sort of wards. Down by the Grantley Adams Airport, there's an area that was like the police training centre, and they've converted that into an isolation centre. So if they get people coming in and off a flight, they can take them straight there, where they will be isolated. In fact, we had a...
How long are they isolated for?
Usually it's around 14, 21 days. It's until they come and pass a couple of clear tests.
And who pays for them to stay wherever they're staying for 14 days?
At the moment, the government, because they're obviously trying to protect the island, which is thing. I mean, we had a Scottish gentleman
Yeah.
who came here literally a few days before this all kicked off. He was here on holiday and he contracted coronavirus. And he was taken to the Paragon, which is the one by the airport. And he was isolated there. He was treated there. And he's now free of coronavirus. But he's been struggling to get back to the UK because Barbados never closed its borders. Because by closing the borders, it would have prevented flights coming in with PPE, medicine, ventilators, things that the island desperately needed. And also, once they closed the borders, they wouldn't be able to get people out. And currently around the island, we have something like about 12, maybe 14 cruise ships, because we were the only port that were actually allowing people to get off the ship and be shipped direct straight up to the airport onto flights. But they had to pass a test before they got off the ship to prove that they were clear of the virus before they could be taken to be flown off the island.
Because that's one of the things we've been desperate for here in the UK is testing. And they still haven't got testing. They've got something with, there's some great news about a test which you can do to see if you have had coronavirus, but not whether you've currently got it. So what was the test they had in Barbados?
I'm not sure exactly what it was. I mean, we're in a fortunate position. In terms of the population, it's classed as quite a high figure, but we've actually only had 7 deaths.
But every death is tragic, but 7 deaths. Okay, how many people have actually had?
I know. So, as I say earlier, I went and picked up the newspaper, so I can tell you the figures because I've got them here as of yesterday. We have had in Barbados 86 confirmed cases.
86 cases and 7 deaths.
44 females, 42 males.
Of those who contracted it died.
Of those confirmed cases, 7 died, 67 have so far recovered, and 12 are still currently in isolation. And we have completed 3,783 tests.
Okay.
So at the moment, we had 2 days last week. We haven't had a death now for about 10 days. The 7th one was about 10 days ago. And with, I think, only one exception, which means 6 of them, they all had either flown back to the island or were relations of people who'd flown back to the island who then turned out to have it, got taken into isolation, and that happened. What they're doing is, if anyone actually tests positive, they're then doing contact tracing, going through every person that they've come into contact with. And because we've had the curfew situation and people not having been able to go out, that makes it a whole lot easier, because the people that they're going to have come into contact with are probably other family members, and it's easier for them to list which family members they've come into contact with.
It's a manual system of contact tracing. You don't have an app or anything.
No, we don't have an app, no. They've looked at various ways of doing that. They were looking at an app at one point. But I think the problem is that even though, I mean, I know in the UK they tried that, and the problem was the app wasn't working particularly well. Was it on the Isle of Wight they tried it?
That was the initial trial, but they are going to, that's the idea now, is that you...
Yeah. But obviously the UK's population, I mean, the population of Barbados, I used to live just outside of Plymouth in the UK, and the population of Barbados is sort of similar to that of Plymouth. It's between 250 and 300,000 people. So it's like, Barbados is a population of a relatively mid-sized city in the UK, not a big city, but not the smallest. And that is the population. Obviously, that population explodes during the tourist season when we've got lots of tourists on the island. But fortunately, because although we didn't close the borders, what the government has said was you can come to Barbados, you do a 14-day mandatory isolation. So that stopped
Paid for
tourists
by the
from.
government. Paid for by the government.
Yeah,
So in other words, get 14 days added to your holiday.
but that was the point. Most people that come here come here for a 2-week holiday.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to come here for a 2-week holiday to spend it in an isolation centre. So the government, as I say, very clever the way they did it. They stopped the tourists coming here without saying you can't come.
And what was life like in an isolation centre? I mean, can you get us some access to that? Can you get us some people to take us around and show us what a day in the life of an isolation centre would be?
I doubt it. I will try. I will try.
It'd be interesting, but clearly it's not. When people say, "Oh, great, I'll go to Barbados. I'm going to get a 2-week holiday," that it's not that. You're not on the beach every day getting free pina coladas, are you?
Oh no, because apart from anything else, you're supposed to stay in your house. You know, you're supposed to remain indoors unless you're going out to do one of the things that you're allowed to do. Yeah. And until, I mean, there are still a lot of expats who have holiday homes here, still here on the island. In fact, just before you called me, British Airways have announced they're doing another repatriation flight this Tuesday, and some friends of mine that were due to go home at the beginning of April are now. Sorry about that. Someone's sending me a message. Somebody, these friends, they were due to go back at the beginning of April. They've just got onto the flight going out on Tuesday now. The first thing I said to them is, "Oh, are you going back to 2 weeks isolation in the UK?" But apparently that's not likely to come until the beginning of June, so they're going to miss that.
So they can, so bizarrely, and this is why I say it's astounding what the different ways that people treat it. If I fly into Barbados, I have to stay in isolation for 2 weeks. If I'm coming from Barbados, I can just go backwards and forwards. Is that effectively what your understanding is?
Yeah, well, obviously, because the only flights coming in and out of the island now are either repatriation flights, which have pretty much died off now because those people that wanted to get off the island got off the island. I think there was an Air Canada flight on yesterday, Friday or Saturday. All the days merge into one now. I mean, it really is becoming difficult to realise what day of the week it is. Yeah. But anyway, so Air Canada took out a lot of people because obviously the other thing that we have here are students.
Yeah.
You know, there's a Canadian university has a small office here, which is part of McGill University. We also have the American Hospital University, and we had Ross University. Most of their people managed to get away. They put on flights as soon as it all started kicking off, and they knew that they were going to have trouble getting home, and people wanted to get home to be with their families.
Oh, you've frozen, Terry. I think you've frozen. Whilst we try and get that connection back to Terry, we're going to take a small break. Come back.